Hi everyone. This is a pre-video for the best practices in neuroimaging panel session with a focus on collaborations, big data, and ethics. And I was asked to touch upon key ethical principles when working with collaborative teams and open data, working with open science teams to improve the workflow of open science, and best practices in data analysis and data sharing while keeping in mind researchers who may use the data or code after. So here we go into the neuroverse. Collaborations are essential for science. Collaborations were a big part of my lab's culture when I was in grad school and has continued. Our group has three primary threads of research: understanding the neurophysiology and translational potential for human communication, machine learning frameworks and their applications to precision medicine and psychiatry, and informatics projects to improve reproducibility, data sharing, and analytics. As you may well imagine, we are not experts in all of these areas, and the complexity and knowledge has grown exponentially. Thus, we rely on many collaborators to carry out these projects. The last decade has transformed my space of collaborations significantly. Much of this started with the INCF Data Sharing Task Force, and then intersected and got augmented through the efforts of the Neuro Bureau that led to the brain hack community over the years. I have had the luxury and privilege of working with many individuals. This is a subset of people, with many more who have shaped, reshaped, and corrected my thinking and approaches to science and life more broadly. These collaborations have increased exposure of science and tools, welcomed new individuals to contribute, and sustained things when resources were tight. I've also been part of collaborations that simply did not pan out, many undone by things I did or in many cases did not do. So let us raise questions about collaborations through a few examples. Here's one. Science is complex and there are many competing forces at play. Sometimes it feels that there are perhaps as many rubrics for collaborators as there are collaborations. For me personally, perhaps the single most important one has been whether the collaborative team can communicate, debate openly, and feed off of each other, and whether they can work towards a goal. Here is an example. In this paper, led by Daniel Margulis, was built on work that was presented, debated, and engaged many folks for a few years. Personally, I like science this way, a public conversation that culminates in a publication. But many see it as a private conversation just amongst the collaborators, that you then put the right message forward, not the messy one. What do you think it should be? Moving on to example number 2. Last year at an MIT class project, the work grew into a paper. This was a collaboration that stemmed from learning, and each student took on different components of the project. For them, they never considered writing different papers. And while that may have been possible, even in this case, the story was much richer with the components together. Indeed, the collaboration itself benefited from their interactions, and the three of us who advised them from the perspectives of a clinician, a computational linguist, and a machine learning person did so to increase the richness of the things that they had done. Given some of the complexities we face for today's scientific questions, is science better served by team science and some reduction of redundancy? Or is it better served by many separate groups trying to do the same thing? Would scientific collaboration be better if seen through a lens of the principles of a community of practice? For those who have not seen this, a community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. I would say that it is such communities of practice that have spearheaded the generation of open data in neuroimaging and neuroscience more broadly. Over the last 2 decades, access to data sets have grown at an exponential rate, and that in turn has resulted in a large number of publications mining such data. In fact, it has changed the focus for many researchers to not collect data at all, but to focus their efforts and their questions on these open data sets. And this raises new questions. On one hand, everybody should not really have to collect their own data. These open data sets are often richer, capture much more diversity than a local data set, and allow better testing of reproducibility and generalizability. They lower the overall cost for many people. On the other hand, this may create a significant differential in effort between researchers who still need to collect specific data sets for their questions and analyze those data, and those who benefit from leveraging the collective intelligence that comes with these public open data sets. What about the resources required to work with such open data? Over the last decade, we have moved from doing studies on 20 to 30 participants to thousands of participants. Doesn't this immediately benefit only those who have access to resources, i.e. the labs that have greater compute capabilities or cloud credits or personal resources? Is the science that is derived representative of and beneficial to the population? Are we again biasing our results through the biases of these data sets? Should there be a community say in what data sets should be collected and distributed? And for clinical data, should there be an equitable focus on rare disorders versus major disorders? I hope we all get to consider these questions as we use these resources or plan new ones. And many of these questions are directly related to the next thread on working with open science teams to improve the workflow of open science. I simply cannot say something about open science without reference to this blog post. I do agree with Tal that the term has evolved into a catch-all phrase for many things: transparency, access, inclusivity, reproducibility, and discourse. But I have never thought of it as an identity. Over the years, I've been involved with many communities of practice that have shared a belief to improve science through greater transparency, greater access, more inclusivity, more reproducibility, and more discourse. So let's consider these elements. Being open allows feedback, it allows dissemination, it allows participation, it allows investigating failures. If I did not show you that something had failed and was closed about it, you would never know almost unless you did it yourself. Being open also allows education, and being open allows us to challenge things. Being closed does not support any of these. We have to be our strongest critics, and to do that, we need information, which in turn means openness. However, most of our views on openness has traditionally been through the publication and the resulting discourse around it. Consider all the publications being available to explore a domain. Most are behind walls. The advent of preprints is a very recent phenomenon in our community. And as an example, consider that it took a pandemic to make publishers provide open access to all SARS-CoV-2 related publications to accelerate finding solutions. An immediate assertion that being open accelerates discovery and innovation. Yes, such openness increases the noise to start with, but also reduces it quicker by closing the feedback loop faster. So if we look at the full spectrum of this, consider all the data now available throughout this flow to replicate findings, to gather evidence for a theory or a model, and most importantly, to understand when things fail. Also consider all the tools being made available that allows using the right tool for the right job. And consider that these tools are all open, with bugs being reported and discussed, with improvements being made continuously in support of science, and by scientists for most part. But it's not just about availability. Improving the workflow of open science also means improving participation from diverse parts of our field. addressing different use cases, making things more robust, and improving efficiency and effectiveness. And a lot of this will depend on education, on how to do this more transparently and reproducibly. This can come through traditional mechanisms such as university courses, or through participation in online schools, such as the ABCD Repronym course that just happened. It can come through hackathons like the Brain Hacks, online forums like Neurostars, in code repositories, and in doing open reviews. And this takes me to the last thread, that improving the workflow will also depend on us converging towards consensus on what we agree and disagree on, what information we are missing, and what steps could be taken to resolve differences or stick with them. What are some of the things to consider about best practices in data analysis and data sharing while keeping in mind researchers who may use the data or code after? Whenever I hear the term best practices, it makes me think of this Dilbert cartoon. Also, the term best practices, does that mean there are no better practices? Has this practice been shown to be demonstrably better than others? Or is it the only known practice, or one among a set of good practices? With many of these terms that we use, there are obviously different points of view that come with it. In fact, in neuroimaging, as the field continues to evolve, we have converged on many good practices and perhaps some practices of questionable complexity. With the advent of strong data science ecosystem, various tools are being built to provide more consistent pre-processing, such as this NIPREPS ecosystem, but also tools for better harmonization of data across sites, greater reproducibility through containerized solutions, deep learning tools for neuroimaging, meta-analysis, and information in the literature to brain mapping. Alongside data and software, metadata standards are also improving to provide for better reuse of data, to better understand the provenance of any digital output, and to better express the details of an experiment and the data acquisition or data processing processes. After all, reuse by others implies the ability to find relevant data and tools across a vast landscape of software and knowing how they work, behave, and perform on different data sets. This is what triggered the work on NIDM as part of that INCF data sharing task force. And it turned out at that time to be too complex a model to be used without the right tools. And that directly led to one of the most dominant changes that has happened in the field in terms of standardization. Now, most people are quite familiar with the Nifty file format and its newer extensions such as SIFTY. BIDS has become the de facto standard for organization of raw data in many neuroimaging labs, with the standard continuing to evolve to support more modalities of data. But this really grew out of user and community needs. Thus, one way to improve sharing for others is to think about the bottlenecks you may have faced at different stages of doing research and thinking how you would improve those steps. Sometimes there's already a solution out there and education can help you find it. At other times, evaluating your own challenges and talking to people often results in tools that we use routinely today. So think about your past and future self, your collaborator, and your students. They are personas that you need to provide data or tools to. For those of you who are just starting out, reach out and ask. There are a lot of people out there to help. Hopefully this provides a quick overview of this complex space of doing collaborative, transparent, and inclusive science. While I look forward to your questions, please do consider some of the questions I raised earlier. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on such issues.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bimal Lakhani. I'm the VP of Product at Health Tech Connects in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. That's just outside of Vancouver. I want to thank OHBM and the student postdoc group for inviting me to speak today. I'm really excited to talk about my transition from academia to industry. It's something I'm very passionate about talking to people about because it's an important topic. The title of my talk today is called From the Bench to the Boardroom. If you look at the fine print, I didn't actually work at a bench, but I do like alliterations and it worked for my title. So I'm going to take you a little bit of a walk down how I got to my position today and what I actually do, what I love about it, what's challenge, and how academia really set me up uh, to do this well. And I'm really happy about that. I think it's an important message to pass forward. So my claims to fame to start, the reason I got into brain research at all was because I was a terrible hockey player. I actually continue to be a terrible hockey player, but I always wanted to be a pro athlete. I knew that wasn't going to happen pretty early in my life. Then I moved into sports and physiotherapy and I just wanted to stay close to athletics. And from that, I actually found out that I am more interested in what happens when the brain isn't working the way it's supposed to. So I moved from sort of high performance athletics into brain injury and recovery and primarily stroke rehabilitation research for the majority of my academic career, and in particular, balance control and gait recovery after stroke. For a little while, I was on the University of Waterloo kinesiology website. That was a big moment for me. It was pretty famous. I felt famous during my undergrad. That's me in the School of Anatomy photo, pretending to be working in a lab, but just a photo shoot, but a big day for me. And also, very importantly, I was a contestant on Wipeout Canada. If you remember those big red balls, I think they're international. I did not do well. I had very poor balance control, which fit into the Geeks versus Beauties episode quite well. In terms of how I got here today, well, I'm sure like many of you, I had a very clear plan in my head of what I wanted to do. It was very simple. From 2003 to 2007, I did my undergrad in kinesiology at the University of Waterloo in Canada. Again, I was on that path towards, physiotherapy and academia. In 2008 and 2009, I started at U of T in Toronto and did rehab sciences master's. I continued because I liked it so much, did my PhD there for another 4 years. Then I moved out west across Canada to Vancouver to do my postdoctoral fellowship at the University of British Columbia with Dr. Laura Boyd at the Brain Behavior Lab. And naturally, from that point on, I was going to have a comfy tenured faculty position, and that was going to be my future. And I was pretty prepared for that. That's never a story that's true because as real life goes, things come up. And my reality was quite different from my plan. And what I wanted to do was become a physio because of that sports connection. Luckily, at Waterloo, I had some co-op terms. Turns out I didn't love those physio co-op terms, and it's not a knock to the profession. It just wasn't for me. And I was lucky to be able to realize that early in my academic career. So I moved on. I got into research, started my master's, was loving that. Really wanted to move out to Vancouver to do my PhD. But again, as things happen, my family had some health problems at the time. I stayed back in Toronto for another 4 years to do my PhD to take care of all that. And then 2013 comes around. I got married during my PhD, which was awesome. I also realized PhDs are very hard. And many times I thought maybe I'll quit and work at Starbucks and, pumpkin spice everything all day, every day. It wasn't a clear and rosy path. We did make it to Vancouver, though, together. But then the thing they also don't tell you, or you kind of learn as you go, is, we moved to Vancouver. We loved it in Vancouver. And that whole concept of doing your postdoc and having to leave and go somewhere else was kind of a bummer. It wasn't all about me anymore. My wife had found a great position in Vancouver and we were loving our life, and it wasn't just about work anymore. So there was a lot going on. And so in 2017, as I was finishing my postdoc, it really was a giant question mark as to what I was going to do next. And that was a pretty scary thought after putting all that time in. So again, as these things sometimes go, I had an unexpected step. I was sitting there in 2017, went to a friend's wedding, and happened to bump into a former lab member who I hadn't seen in over a year and a half. And, you get a couple drinks, you get to talking, and you find out what they're doing. We chatted for a while. She's not pictured in this photo, but this is the night of the wedding. You can tell I was having a wonderful time. You might recognize some other OHBMers in this photo. I won't name names, but after chatting with her that night and having, a pretty loose conversation, she said, you should come work for us. She had started the week before, so she didn't have that power, but she did get in my head, and I thought about it, and I looked up the company. It was a neurotech company starting in the Vancouver area. I was super excited about that thought. So the next day, I wrote a very long email to the president of the company, who was also a scientist who had started this company in tech. And I just told him about myself and said I was looking for mentorship or employment opportunities. And I just attached myself to him. And so I was really just curious about seeing what they were doing. And I went and saw the space. I went and visited multiple times. I just got really in the network of what this company was doing. And I eventually landed the job there because I was persistent and got very lucky in terms of timing. They didn't have a job posting, but I basically just forced their hand because I had some academic offers on the table that I didn't want to leave for. And so there was a lot there, but this was the email that started that. It took about 6 months from this point to get a job offer of really being close to the company, and came out of nowhere unexpectedly because of some lucky networking. So this is an important step, I think, for a lot of academics who are curious about their position, whether it's in academia or not. I think this is a really critical thing to do. You know, what are the things that are important to you? It's critical that you prioritize what matters in your life, and that these are the things that you will not budge on. So when I was sitting there deliberating and thinking about what I wanted to do, and that job opportunity did come up, it still had to hit all my boxes. And for me, these were 4 things. I had this list ready. First was family. So, you know, would my family want to live in this place? And what would life be like outside of the job? Is there something else to do? Because to me, I love my work, don't get me wrong, but it's never been all about work. I want to have balance. I want to have work balance. I want to have life balance. And I want to have self balance for myself as well. I'm naturally curious. So will my job feed my need to question things? I can be critical of things. And how can I make a real world impact with whatever I'm doing, whether it's research or otherwise? I want to be able to use the skills I've learned in academia for whatever I was up to. Mentorship. So things like this, I love doing. I love teaching. So can I still teach and provide guidance? We'll have that opportunity to work with students or with more junior members of a team and have that relationship to give back really everything that's been given to me to this point. And finally, personal development. So, you know, again, with academia, you're always learning new skills. So I wanted to make sure whatever I was doing was not stagnant. I wanted to make sure whatever I was doing would give me the opportunity to learn new skills and that it would be a career, not just a job. I wasn't looking for a short-term step. I wanted to go somewhere where I could see continuous growth into a career. And these were the 4 things that at this company checked the boxes for me. And they might have other boxes might have been checked at other companies and other academic opportunities, but these are the ones for me that worked there. And that's why I said yes to the opportunity. So what does our company do? Well, at Health Tech Connects, that's really a parent company to 3 smaller companies. So when I joined, I was employee number 7 or 8. Today, we're just over 50 employees. So that's just over 4 years. We've gone up in size about 5 times. I primarily work for NeuroCatch, which is a medical device company that uses EEG to measure cognition. And the whole point of this is to get this into clinical settings. So it's a simple, rapid test to give a quick measure of cognition at the point of care, rather than needing complicated research grade EEG to do this in a lab. So that's where I jumped in as a scientist when I started. And currently I'm the VP of product. So I made a big transition in my career over the 4 years there from pure science into product development. Nicely though, because we are a medical device company, we wanted to make sure we were connected to what's happening with clients and patients and in the research setting as well. So the NeuroCatch device measures cognition, but on the same floor, we have something called the Center for Neurology Studies, which is a testing site. It's a clinical trial site that tests our device as well as other emerging technologies who are looking for regulatory clearances in the United States with the FDA or in Canada with Health Canada or other locations in Europe, for example. And this got really interesting and we got to see a lot of cool tech. So you can see the missing piece was actually seeing how these things worked in real life. So we opened a fully functioning clinic a few years ago called the Surrey Neuroplasticity Clinic, which takes these new therapies, which have been approved by Health Canada, and puts them into adjunct treatments as well in a fully functioning clinic with physiotherapists, occupational therapists, kinesiologists, psychologists, you name it. And so the nice thing about this model, and this is really the benefit of the system, is we all learn from each other. So because we have clinicians and research professionals on site, they can tell us as a medical device company what their patients need and what they need. And so we can really listen to our users to build the most effective devices, go test them, and then have them tried in the clinic immediately once they're approved. So it's a really nice flywheel that we're really proud that we've built. It really came from an idea born in the lab. So the medical device that we have now was primarily coming out of the Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC, with Dr. Ryan Darcy. And these are some of the publications that came out prior to the company forming and also during the company's time. And then it translated into a clinical application. So this is what the NeuroCatch platform actually looks like. We use off-the-shelf hardware. This is a G-Tech EEG, which some might be aware of, but we built all the software ourselves. So all the algorithms and all the sort of advanced AI that goes into the system is built by our team, and we pair that up with existing hardware to build the medical device. And so the idea here is you can do a 6-minute test, requires no patient interaction, and it gives you a very simple and easy to read report for clinicians to determine treatment patterns based on someone's cognition, depending on what their brain injury is. So it's a device we're very proud of. We've released the first one in Canada a couple of years ago through Health Canada, and we're going for FDA clearances in Health Canada again for our next generation this summer. So it's a very busy and exciting time for our company. So I was asked to talk about a day in the life, and I honestly couldn't pull together what a day looked like. So what I've done here is a week in the life of what my job looks like. And it's going to seem like a lot because it is, and this is why I love it. So I think they simultaneously go hand in hand. This is what keeps me going. And this is probably my challenge in academia was I had trouble sticking with, to me, sort of the day-to-day grind of working through academic challenges, which felt similar every day. And for a lot of people, they thrive in that. So this is just how you know yourself. For me, I got distracted a lot, and I got distracted very easily. So in this job, what I get to do on a week-to-week basis, and this is no lie, I just looked at my calendar from the last 2 weeks and picked off all the meetings I was part of and projects I was working on. This is what I do. So I'm part of, obviously, product design and development. So all of our design teams run through, I guess, my management at this point, and I get to oversee that part of the company, which is exciting. But also something I had no formal training in before getting here. So a lot of learning on the job. Team management. So I have a team of people reporting to me now, something that I had, again, no formal training in, but is a critical part of my job. Takes about half of my time is just making sure that the team is doing well, both from mental health perspective, from workload, and just generally feeling good about their jobs and happy there. There's project management. So all the ideas of hitting timelines, your cost, your scope of your project, and making sure that's all hitting on budget. Customer service, I very closely related to our customer complaints and making sure that they're resolved in a timely and satisfactory manner. I still work in science, so we do a lot of science and R&D and fundamental work to build our future devices, and I'm part of all of those studies. I'm still managing to get publications through the company, which is great. Working through medical device regulations and our regulatory team, so I work heavily on this. Medical devices are a highly regulated industry, and I work on that team. Accounting and bookkeeping, certainly not my favorite thing. But being accountable for budget lines means I had to learn about accounting and what that means and what a bottom line actually looks like. Intellectual property, so we develop a lot of IP through our R&D, and we have to know what to do with it, whether it's trademarks, patents, trade secrets. We can do a whole another session on that. Human resources in general, so hiring and firing and all those types of decisions that go into that. Vendor and supplier management, so making sure that our vendors are living up to what they say they're going to do. Contract negotiations with those vendors or with other team members. Conflict resolution, this does come up. Again, as the leader of a team, I have to deal with team members who might not be engaging with each other positively and stepping in and helping out in a positive and productive way. And lots of meetings. So my days are full of meetings, which means there's not a lot of time to get work done. This looks like a lot, but I love it. And this is primarily what I find most beneficial about moving into industry is you get industry specifically for a startup. You get an opportunity to really just try everything and lean into the things that you think you're good at or that you want to learn more about, and slowly remove the things that maybe you're not as good at or you're not as interested in. And don't get me wrong, I don't love accounting and bookkeeping and a couple of the things on this list. They're part of my job. But for the most part, these are things that I never knew before and got to learn on the job and got trusted to try and fail a lot. Don't get me wrong. But I've gotten a chance to really love these pieces of my job now. So another key piece here, and this is one you're going to hear a lot when you go to these talks, I'm sure, but I don't like networking, but WOW is important. And, to get my job here, this was networking. It was somewhat fluky, but it was definitely networking. And there's a lot of ways to do this now. And actually, being home for the last year has made it interesting in terms of networking, because you've actually been able to open up the world to meet people you might never have been able to previously, unless you go physically and attend meetings like this with OHBM. And it'd be nice to go physically back to a meeting. I fully agree. But the online path actually opens up some doors for you that didn't exist before. So one thing you can try is cold LinkedIn searches and informational interviews. Go on LinkedIn, pick a company or 5 companies that you like, scroll through the list of employees and find a title of someone you think is interesting and just message them. and tell them, hey, would you have 15 minutes to chat with me? I'm in grad school. I'm really curious about what you do. I'd love to talk to you for a few minutes. Don't make it longer than 15 because it gives you both an out if it's not going very well. If it's going well, you'll have another call. Just go find out about them, ask them a few questions, maybe 2 or 3, and you'll be surprised how many people will say yes to you. Connect via social media, do it carefully, but all your favorite scientists are on there, and all your favorite companies are on there. So go talk to them. Attend international workshops and conferences remotely. Now you have an open door to go to all these things which are happening on Zoom. It might not happen for much longer, and honestly, I hope it doesn't. But while they're happening, take advantage and go meet people you might not usually get to meet. Attend networking events at the conferences. Do not just hang out with your lab. Try and get out and actually go to those networking events and talk to people because everyone is there for the same goal. It might be uncomfortable, but if you've gone to that event, it means that you want to network. So it's a much more comfortable space to do it. Go to meetups, whether they're virtual or in person, meetup.com. They're in most cities around the world. Find common topics of thought and go meet people in person, hopefully again, and know who are friends of your friends. So if your friend starts at a new company, find out about their networks and who they know and chat with them. I mean, your friends are probably very likely to be able to help you if they know what you're looking for. Finally, tell your mentors and champions what you're looking for. So if your mentors don't know what you want, they can't help you. Their networks are usually huge. Make sure they know if you're interested in leaving academia or trying something new so that they can be aware and put your name out there and help you out a little bit too. This is one of the most important things I think I had to learn in transitioning because I went into my industry position with very little confidence that I learned anything valuable in academia. And in the first year, I realized I was horribly wrong. And this is sort of a summary of every skill that I try and use in my professional life now that I didn't realize that I'd actually picked up very clearly through academia. And I was very thankful for that. It actually wasn't that much of a gap. So the questions that you should ask yourself are, can you talk to other people? Communication is honestly 80% of my job. Can I actually have a conversation about something in a way that, I can understand and someone else can understand and be communicative in a, formal but important way? Can you listen intently and not always need your voice heard? I think academics are inherently good at this for the most part. A very important skill. Again, you don't want to be the last person in the room necessarily. You want to listen to a conversation, be able to participate when you need. Can you motivate others to be excited about the work you're doing? Well, look back at all the posters you're presenting and the people that you talk to. And you picked a very niche topic to learn about, and you are here doing that every day. Can you simplify a problem but not trivialize it? Think about the audiences when you go give presentations. When you present whatever your issue is and your problem and your research, you're doing this all the time. And this is a critical skill in industry. Can you think critically about a question? I think that's a no-brainer. But can you develop creative solutions? This is a challenge and often gets stuck with academics, and you can do this. Can you lead a team of people? So when you get the opportunity to do project management in your lab, do it. Take on a project that you might not normally have done, lead a group and get that experience because it's a critical skill once you leave. And most importantly, can you avoid being what's on the slide? It's shocking how many people can't pass that test. And honestly, if you give things to the world, it's surprising how much will come back. So give your time, give your energy, give your heart, and be genuine and courteous to the people around you. Things will come your way. People see that and they recognize it. I know it can feel long if you're that person who never gets recognized for it, but it works. Do not fall into the trap of treating people like garbage. And again, you'll be shocked how many folks do that. So finally, I'll throw this up here. I want to summarize with one slide because this is really the part that worked for me, but it's not going to be true of everybody. This is just a quick thing about knowing your value. You are valuable. Make sure you're aware of that. Don't let the industry take advantage of you. You have learned a lot. You bring a lot of skills, and that goes back to the last slide. I'll leave you with these thoughts on my strategies for finding jobs in industry, just kind of rehashing a couple things. I touched on it a little bit, network. I am notoriously terrible at this and I don't enjoy it, but it is the only reason I found and created my job. Seek and continue to seek mentorship. Mentorship does not stop when you're done your graduate studies. It doesn't stop when you're done your postdoc. I still have many mentors I rely on. Go back to them for support and advice, and don't forget get them a bottle of wine once in a while too. Definitely goes a long way. For me, it was critical when I was about to accept my industry position that I went back to all my mentors who were academics and asked them if I was making a mistake. I valued their opinions so much, and I didn't want to disappoint them. They put a lot of time in me as an academic, and I needed to hear them tell me to go. And to a person, they all said, "This is a great opportunity. Go try it." And that's the push I needed, and I was unbelievably thankful for that push. Put yourself out there. So be active and be careful on social media. Make a website with your CV on it. Squarespace is a great place to start. Talk to people, join committees, attend industry events, and avoid the conference comfort bubble that I mentioned. Also, don't be afraid to promote yourself. Academics are notoriously humble. There is a way to not be humble, but also not feel like you have an ego. Don't put yourself down. Talk about your accomplishments. Be proud of what you've done. You've done a lot. Be persistent. If you're networking, people are busy and you might slip to the bottom of the pile sometimes with email. If they haven't said no thanks, it's not over. Keep trying until they say no. Rethink your resume. I'm sure you've heard this a lot. Unfortunately, publications aren't going to get you to the industry job you dreamed of. They're important, but they're not the top billing. Imagine yourself on the other end of a resume. What would you want to see there? And then get lucky. And I put my story here very happily because I attended a friend's wedding. I ran into another old friend. I caught up. I drank a few mixed beer and bourbon cocktails. I found out they did something cool. I asked if they're looking for anybody else, and I applied all the above steps here, and I got my job. So yes, there is a bit of luck that goes into this, but you build your luck by making the opportunities for yourself by doing the steps here. So the real takeaway is that there is no straight path. I thought I was going a straight way, and I ended up where I am today. And all I can say is it's working out okay so far. It might change. It might have some more hardship, but I feel more prepared than ever to face whatever comes next because of this path that I've taken to this point. And that could be your path as well. Thank you very much for your time today. Please feel free to get in touch with me. You can find me on Twitter or at my email there. But always recommend getting more than one opinion. So I will always give you those 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever you want. I will send you some time to chat if you want to chat further, to go deeper into any of these topics or any more. Here are some good books as well. If you take a screenshot, you can just dive into some of these books. I think they were important ones for me as I got going in my career and this new career, and they've helped me along the way. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Hi, and welcome to this workshop on reimagining the incentivization structure in academia. I'm Cooper Smout, and I'd like to thank the OHBM Student and Postdoc Special Interest Group for inviting me to lead this workshop. So I thought I'd get started with a quick story about my journey. I did my PhD at the Queensland Brain Institute, and over the course of 5 long and sometimes painful years, I managed to publish a few of my studies as papers. Now, the first paper I published was eye-opening for me because it took 2 years, 5 journals, and multiple rounds of review before it was finally published. And I found myself thinking this is just the most ridiculously slow and frustrating process. And I also found myself feeling pressured to tell a particular story. And that was a story that was significant, novel, and clear, never mind that science is normally quite messy. And this combined with the pressures of a PhD and me questioning my future in academia threw me into a state of disillusionment and a deep depression that lasted a couple of years. Now, I pulled myself out of this depression through 2 things. First, meditation and taking better care of myself more generally. But secondly, discovering hope in the very powerful open science community out there that's already taking big steps towards creating a better system for all of academia. And so I founded a project that I'll tell you about at the end of this talk. But I also spent about the last year of my PhD trying to find funding for this project and ultimately failing. And I reached the conclusion that I could actually spend my time better just generating funds in my own way rather than continuing a traditional sort of postdoc route. And so I left academia once I graduated. I joined an independent institute for researchers called IGDOR, and I started playing poker. Now, this is a side hustle that I'd learned during my undergrad days I was profitable in. And so I continued this up. I picked this up again as a way to fund myself and my open science projects moving forward. Now, happily, earlier this year, a private benefactor heard about me and my work and has offered me a small amount of money that will mean over the next year or so, I won't have to spend as much time playing poker. And I'm planning on putting some of this money towards a new meta-science paradigm that I hope will end up in some innovative tools that I think down the track could play some role in disrupting scholarly publishing. So if you're interested in that part of my story, please ask me during the discussion and I can tell you a bit about what my future is going to look like. In the meantime, I would like to dedicate the bulk of this talk to an open science hero of mine, Dr. John Tennant. John sadly died last year in a motorbike accident in Bali, but he was an inspirational figure to myself and many others in the open science space because he had gone rogue after finishing his PhD and spent the last few years of his life traveling around, giving open science talks, and building a really strong open science community that was dedicated to change, which is called the Open Science MOOC. Now, before John's passing, he made all of his talks openly available via Figshare. And so the vast majority of the slides I'm about to show you are actually taken from John's presentations, both in a kind of homage to him and his work, but also, to be honest, because it was way easier. And I saved a lot of time doing this. And I think this is a great analogy or demonstration of how much easier our lives could be if only we would start sharing our work more effectively. So without further ado, part one, a global scientific crisis. There are currently 4 major crises in science: access, reproducibility, serials, and evaluation. Access just simply refers to the fact that the vast majority of research remains inaccessible to most people on this planet. Now, back in 2018, around 28% of the scholarly literature was open access, and although this statistic has increased slightly in the years since, when you consider that it's been 25 years since the open access movement began, and we've poured billions of dollars into this movement, I'll let you decide whether that is a success or not. And also, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, access to science is a human right, and by denying people access to this, we are very literally costing people their lives because doctors around the world don't have access to the latest literature. Now, the second crisis is the reproducibility crisis, and most of you have probably heard of the large-scale replication studies that have been conducted in psychology. You may not be aware that they've also failed to reproduce the majority of findings in other fields like genomics, cancer research, and there have also been some large-scale replication studies in cognitive neuroscience that have failed to replicate key findings. So what this is saying is that our current system is failing to help us understand what is ground truth. And without that understanding, it makes it very difficult for ECRs like you and me to build on other people's work. I personally have wasted around 6 months of my life trying to replicate findings that just weren't ever going to replicate before moving on to more fruitful paths in my PhD. And if we step out and look at the bigger picture, we have some incredibly important problems that we need to solve in the coming decades. Chief among them is climate change. And personally, I think that science could play an incredibly important role in tackling these problems. But the longer that we maintain an unreliable, slow, and inefficient scientific system is the longer that we are holding back progress that we could otherwise be making on these crucial problems. Now, the third crisis is the serials crisis, and this just simply refers to the fact that for decades now, commercial publishers have been draining billions of dollars from the research sector every year. The price of subscription journals has outpaced inflation by over 300% in the span of 3 decades, making scholarly publishing the most profitable industry on earth. And although I don't have time to get into all of the scary details here, I would recommend anyone check out Paywall the Movie, which is a free movie you can look at and takes a deep dive into the business of scholarship and how it's hurting us and society in the process. Now, the fourth crisis is the evaluation crisis, and this simply refers to the fact that we are more likely to be evaluated based on where we publish than what we publish. And this kind of publish or perish mentality has a big impact on us early career researchers, from the difficulty it is that we have to publish null results and negative findings, as well as the pressure it places on us to commit questionable research practices like p-hacking or selective reporting. Now, I'm not alone in having experienced mental health issues, and research shows that over a third of PhD students have sought help for anxiety or depression caused by their PhD study. And ultimately, these toxic working environments are causing high rates of attrition, with very, very small numbers of people actually surviving the gauntlet of science to become professors down the track. I think the statistic is less than 1%, depending on what country you're in. Okay, So that ends the roundup of all of the negative part about science. And now I get to tell you about all of the cool, exciting things that are happening in the open science revolution. But first of all, what is open science? Well, open science on the one hand is a set of principles like transparency, reproducibility, and accountability. On the other hand, it's a set of practices like open access and open methods and pre-registration. And yet again, it's a set of values that we might strive towards, like equity, freedom, and fairness. Now, each of these principles, practices, and values occurs within a broader cultural landscape, which is going to have to shift if open science is to become the norm. And this is an infographic that I've borrowed from Brian Nosek, who founded the Center for Open Science. And it basically highlights all of the different layers of change that are going to have to happen if open science is to become the norm. And what I want to do is focus first on these two fundamental crucial layers, infrastructure and the easy user experience, and highlight that there are no longer any technological or technical barriers to you doing open science. And this, I think, is made very evident by this awesome infographic, which shows you that every step of the research pipeline, there are tools that are openly available and free to use that mean you can make your research process more open and more collaborative. So this is everything from shared reference libraries like Satra to pre-registering your studies, to sharing data, code, notebooks, and protocols, to sharing your preprints once the paper's written, to using open peer review services and publishing open access, and sharing posters and presentations like the presentations I took a lot of these slides from, which were on John's Figshare account. And then finally, through communicating through social media and using alternative evaluation metrics in your resume and website. The point of this is to say that there are no technical barriers to being more open. And so the question is, why are we not actually doing this already? And I think part of the reason is there's this implicit assumption in the scientific community that open science is in some way antagonistic to your career goals. And I want to do my best to quickly dispel that with some data here. So first of all, we have to recognize that open science is not some weird anomaly. It's actually just doing good science. And by comparison, what we're currently doing is not the best possible science that we can be doing. Now, having said that, there's lots of evidence now to show that open science is actually very good for your career. So there are now a large number of studies that have found a clear citation advantage for making your research open access. And this finding extends to open data to show that basically this just makes sense, right? Because if you can get more eyeballs on your papers and your data, then more people can build on those findings, more people can understand what you've done, and ultimately more people can cite your work. And given that citations are the current sort of default for quality or sort of recognition in academia, much as we might like them to not be, this means that making your work openly available is the single best thing that you can do for your career. Now, what about open access fees, you might cry? Well, open access fees, or sort of author processing charges, are actually a sort of artificial invention of the publishing industry. There is actually a free way to make your research openly available called Green Open Access. And what this means is archiving the author-accepted manuscript via a preprint server or your institutional repository, which takes about 5 minutes and is, I would argue, the single best thing that you can do for your career. Now, the second way openness can help you is by getting your work published. So there's this concept in POCR called results-oriented thinking. And what it means is that if you're analyzing your play, you shouldn't focus on the outcomes, but you should focus on the decisions that you made and the information you had available at the time. And this makes sense, right? Because you can't control the outcome. You don't know if a card's going to come that's going to help your opponent, but you might have made the right decision anyway. And this to me is such a clear analogy for what we're doing in science today, because careers are being made or broken based on the results of findings rather than the quality of the work that went into the study. Now, this is, of course, because we peer review studies at the very end of the research life cycle, and there's a relatively new initiative spearheaded by the Center for Open Science and Chris Chambers called Registered Reports. And this aims to add an additional stage of peer review prior to the point at which data is collected and analyzed. And what this means is there's two key benefits to you as a researcher. Firstly, you can now get feedback at an actually useful time when it's not too late to change that critical design flaw that might otherwise ruin your experiment. And secondly, if you get pre-acceptance from one of these journals that have adopted the registered reports format, then it means that they have committed to publishing your paper irrespective of what the findings are. So now you no longer have to pray to the scientific gods to bestow a magical significant result upon you and your research. You can just rest assured that you've done high quality work and report everything openly and transparency in accordance with your a priori plans. And when I made this slide, I was actually surprised to find that there are now over 30 journals offering registered reports. And so I think this is probably one of the biggest and best things that we can do to change incentive structures within academia, and something we should all be getting on board as quickly as possible. Okay, so there's all these other ways that openness helps you, which I don't have time to get to go through right now, but hopefully I've gone some way towards alleviating your fears about open science and demonstrated that open science can actually be perfectly aligned with your career goals. Now, the question then is, how do we make it normative within cognitive neuroscience? And so I want to spend the remainder of this talk telling you about a platform that I've been developing over the last couple of years that aims to organize collective action in the research community. Now, it's called Free Our Knowledge, and I started thinking about these ideas after discussions with all of my peers, and I quickly learned that everybody was as frustrated as I was with the scholarly publishing industry, but no one felt comfortable taking action on their own. And this is because most people I talked to felt that they had to play the game in order to survive, and that if they sort of went out on their own and adopted some kind of new publishing format or some new journal, for example, then they would be putting their careers at risk. Now, this is a very common story, and the data is there to back it up. There are very widespread levels of support for open science, but relatively low levels of actual adoption. And what this means is that we have a discrepancy between our attitudes and our practice. And it's kind of like penguins, because penguins are flock animals and they don't like acting on their own. And scientists are very much the same. Like, we're scared of being the first to move because there's this sort of concern or implicit worry that it might negatively impact us, whether through career outcomes or even just seeming different and being unusual to our colleagues. But the thing is, we all have similar goals. The evidence shows that we all want to support open science. We're just not doing it because we haven't communicated effectively. And so what Project Free Our Knowledge tries to do is organize collective action on open and reproducible science practices. And it really just asks the question, what can we achieve if we all act together all at once? So the way it works is very much modeled on platforms that have been around for over a decade now, like Kickstarter, Collaction, and so on. And basically anyone in the world can propose a campaign. And this just has to be an action that is an open science related action. And it's something that they want their community to adopt. Something like posting a preprint or submitting a registered report, sharing some data, posting a review to a platform, you name it. Now, when this campaign is proposed, they also propose a threshold at which people will take action. And so now we put this campaign out to the crowd. And at this point, anyone can pledge to take that action if and when the predetermined threshold of pledges is met. So crucially, once someone pledges, they don't have to do anything else, right? Because they're not required to act until we reach that critical mass of support. And this means that they're protected from any kind of repercussions, and they can also pledge anonymously if that suits their purposes. Now, finally, if we do reach that critical mass of support, that's the point at which we list everybody on the website and contact them and direct them to carry out the action together. And the idea here is that by acting together, we can protect one another's interests and at the same time motivate those vulnerable researchers that might not feel comfortable taking action on their own, but would feel comfortable taking action if there was a broader cohort of their peers alongside them. So the way I see this evolving over time is that I think in the early days, these campaigns will be very small and target very simple actions. Even just having sort of tens of people take a very simple action like post a preprint. But over time, as we develop more and more campaigns and this concept grows and more people get involved, I could see these smaller scale campaigns coalescing into larger scale campaigns with hundreds, thousands, even potentially tens of thousands of signatures, taking actions all together to create systemic change throughout academia. And I want to bring to attention your campaign that we've posted recently, which is a pre-registration campaign. Now, this campaign asks you to pledge to pre-register a single study in the next 2 years, once 100 of your peers have taken the same pledge. Now, in psychology, we've already got 65 pledges towards the target of 100 pledges, but they're kind of kicking our butt in neuroscience because we've only got 14 pledges so far. So if pre-registration is something that interests you and you would like to support this campaign, then I encourage you to go to freeourknowledge.org and take that pledge today. Now, that campaign might not be for you, and that's fine, but here's the thing. We can develop any campaign we like along any kind of action that you think is relevant to the cognitive neuroscience community, and then we can put it on the crowd and see if it flies. I've listed here some campaigns that I think could be particularly relevant to our community. So submitting a registered report, posting reviewing an article on pre-review, sharing a preprint, or submitting an article to, inverted commas, good journals like eLife Plus and NBDT. Now, if any of you have ideas, I would love to hear from you, and we can also talk about this in the discussion time after this presentation if this is something you guys are interested in. But I want to leave you with this slide and this message and ask the question, who are we waiting on to usher in the open science future that could be so beneficial for all of us? Because if we look at history, we have to be careful not to make the same mistakes. And I look at the open access movement over the last couple of decades and think if we're waiting for universities, publishers, editors, librarians to create the change for us, I think we're going to be waiting a very long time, because it was forecast by Parks back in 2002, based on an understanding of the incentives under the current system, that very little was going to change in the publishing system. And unfortunately, decades later, he's been proven relatively right. Now, at the same time, researchers are the ones who actually take the actions, and so that gives us an incredible amount of power. We have to recognize that we are partly responsible for creating this current system by having built journals into the powerful brands they are today. But with that responsibility and understanding also comes a huge amount of power. If we created this system, we can also uncreate it and create a new system that serves us and our purposes. And I want to highlight as well that ECRs make up the vast bulk of academia. And at the same time, these issues most affect us because we're the ones that will be moving into this system, and we're the ones that are being most hurt by the current system. So if we alone as an ECR community could organize around new baselines of practices that we want to support, then relatively quickly in a short amount of time, we could create new norms and kickstart a revolution in academia. And so on that note, I just want to leave you with this quote that I think is particularly apt. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to talk to you today about navigating a career in academia. I'd like to thank the Organization for Human Brain Mapping and the Student and Postdoc Special Interest Group for inviting me. When thinking about navigating a career in academia, some of us might think of a winding road. It's long, there are twists and turns, but generally we know where to go and how to get there. But for many of us, we picture something more like this. We know there's a road, but we don't really know what's ahead or at the end, or even if we want to travel down that road at all. Today, I hope to provide you with some knowledge and advice about navigating a path in academia. I hope to be able to clear up some of this fog. But it's also totally fine and good if you realize that the more you learn about academia, the less you want to stay in it. It's your decision to make. I'll be telling you about academia and my experiences in it, and I won't be talking about specific careers outside of academia, and that's only because I know relatively little about non-academic careers. But I highly encourage all of you to learn about as many career opportunities as you can so you can make an informed decision about which life is right for you. In today's talk, I'll answer a series of questions that were suggested to me by OHBM's Student and Postdoc Special Interest Group. I'll discuss them one by one, and here they are. I'll talk about what tenure-track jobs are, what you might want to do during your training to make yourself competitive for jobs, what to do if your supervisor is not your ideal mentor, how life differs as a student and postdoc versus a professor, how to think about being open about your political beliefs and attitudes, and finally, I'll discuss hardships that I myself faced on the way. So first, what is a tenure-track position? I'll preface this by saying that I'm going to focus on jobs in North America because those in other parts of the world work a little bit differently. So let's start with tenure-track positions. These are jobs where you start off as an assistant professor, then are promoted to associate professor, and finally full professor. Tenure happens along the way. In some institutions, promotion to associate professor happens along with tenure, but in other places, you're promoted to associate professor first and get tenure shortly after. Getting tenure means that you've gone through a fairly rigorous process to show that you're a successful principal investigator, and as a result, you'll be permanently employed by the university, barring extraordinary circumstances. Tenure is based on three things. So first, research, which includes publications and grants. Second, teaching, often including lecture courses and seminars for undergraduates and/or graduate students. And finally, service, including various types of committee work, organizing conferences, reviewing, editing, and so on. I won't get into a discussion of tenure in detail because that's a whole other talk, but in general, most postdocs and students who are interested in academia tend to want to go for tenure-track positions because they can be more secure and higher paid than non-tenure-track positions. The downside is that the tenure track is extremely stressful and demanding, and there's always a chance you don't get tenure, in which case you have to leave the university and find another job. Within tenure track positions, there are positions that are a mix of research and teaching, some that are mostly teaching, and others that are mostly research. Schools that are classified as R1 schools are those that have heavy research activity, and jobs in R1 schools are more research-focused with some teaching. On the other hand, faculty positions tend to have a more teaching emphasis in schools classified as having less research activity, or undergrad-only institutions, or small liberal arts colleges. Depending on how much you personally enjoy research versus teaching, you might choose to target your job search towards schools that prioritize one versus the other. There are also distinctions between jobs that are so-called hard money, in which you get a guaranteed salary from teaching, and jobs that are soft money, in which a good portion of your salary comes from grants that you are awarded. In soft money positions, you teach less or not at all, but you're expected to cover a good chunk of your salary from your own grants. And typically, soft money positions are in medical schools. So that's an overview of tenure track positions. You start as an assistant professor, then you move on to associate and then full. In contrast, other jobs in universities are non-tenure track. This means that they are not permanent, but instead based on semester-long contracts, year-long contracts, or periodic renewals every few years. These can include positions like lecturer. Note that lecturer means different things in the US versus the UK. In the US, a lecturer position is a full-time faculty position in which much of the person's responsibilities are teaching related. It's not tenure track, but people in lecturer positions can be employed in a particular department for many, many years. There are also positions called visiting assistant professor. This term can mean different things in different universities, but in some places it's a temporary job in which the faculty member teaches and in some cases also does research. There are also adjunct positions. Adjuncts are paid to teach one or a few classes. They're paid by the course and typically not paid very much, unfortunately. And finally, there are positions such as research assistant professor or research scientist, in which much of one's time can be spent on research. I know less about these positions, but in some cases they can be fairly secure and long-term. They're definitely worth exploring if you want to stay in academia but don't think the tenure track life is for you. So now that we generally know what tenure track positions are, how do you get one? I'll preface this by saying there is no single way to get a tenure track position. I know what I did, but of course there might be many people who did the same things that I did but didn't end up with a tenure track position. So the best way to answer the question, how do I get a tenure track job, is to talk to people who got one and people who didn't. And unfortunately, my bet is that their experiences won't be all that different, except for a little bit of luck and timing. And I'll talk about that next. Okay, so here is me as a student and then as a postdoc trying to get a faculty job. It all started with opportunities. As an undergrad, I got the opportunity to work in 2 labs, apply for and receive research funding, and join a psychology program that provides undergrads with intensive research experience. Those opportunities opened a lot of doors for me, but I also had to work incredibly hard throughout undergrad, and I was able to get a fair number of scholarships, fellowships, and awards. But it wasn't just hard work, it was also luck. For example, I happened to take a class with a professor who knew another professor that I really wanted to work with and could provide a recommendation for me. That brings up another point, which is connections. Connections were extremely important to me. At each stage of my career, I was lucky enough to work with professors who were well connected and introduced me to other faculty, which helped me build up my reputation. It's an extreme privilege, and it's unfortunate that that's the case. It would be nice if career progression was solely merit-based. But that said, knowing connections are likely very important can help you to play the game if you're so inclined. Getting to know professors other than your primary mentor can help you when it's time to get advice and mentorship on next steps and get people to advocate for you. In my case, my mentors introduced me to people who ended up being important in later stages of my career. So for example, my graduate school mentors introduced me to the PI who ended up being my postdoc mentor, who in turn introduced me to other faculty who gave me feedback about my job application materials. That said, I don't only rely on mentors to introduce me to other faculty. I also very actively use Twitter to try to build my network on my own and meet colleagues all over the world. And I would be very happy to talk more in the Q&A period about strategies that you could take to build up your network, because I know it can be daunting. During my postdoc, I focused on building my publication record, and I tried to hone my skills in writing and giving presentations. And this in turn made me a stronger competitor for faculty jobs, of which a written application and a job talk are important components. I then went on the job market at a time when Columbia was looking for someone in my research area, so I benefited from good timing. Finally, I put a huge amount of effort into prepping for my job interview, but also benefited from being in the right place at the right time. Columbia was looking for a cognitive neuroscientist who could fit in well with their existing lines of research, and I was able to provide that. I don't want to downplay my effort and hard work because I certainly put in a lot, but I think we all work extremely hard. I benefited hugely from connections and good timing. So for example, I wasn't on the market during a pandemic or a recession. Also, while I focused on things that helped me, my path wasn't without hardship. I struggled. I went on leave during graduate school. For a while, I was very unhappy and I considered leaving academia. And I'll get to this more a bit later. So to answer the question, how do you get a tenure track job? I don't know. I only know what I did, which happened to work for me, but may not have worked out so well if the timing and circumstances had been a bit different. In general, though, I would advise you to try to build up your CV. Prioritize things like publications, grants, conference presentations, and talks. Focus on finishing the projects that you start to turn them into publications. Don't start more projects than you can finish because ultimately only finished projects really count for things like jobs and awards. That said, there is no recipe, so I can't just say if you have X publications and at least one is in journal Y, you'll definitely get a job. It just doesn't work that way. I did have a decent number of publications when I was on the job market, but I've also seen people with many, many more publications not get jobs, and people with fewer publications get jobs. Other things matter as well, such as so-called fit for the position, whether the department thinks you fit in well with what they have and what they need. I'll put that to the side for now, but I'm happy to talk about what fit means and why it can be problematic in the Q&A period. Before I conclude this slide, I want to re-emphasize that this is my path and what worked for me. But there are lots of other routes to take to a tenure track job, including non-traditional trajectories that include stops in other careers. This is not the only path or even the best one, so if you're on a different path, that's totally okay. So given the uncertainty about what matters to get a job, what should you be doing to position yourself to be competitive? That leads me to the next question. What should I focus on during my training? My main tip is to learn about different careers. What you should focus on during your training depends on what you want to do next. You'll want to focus on different things depending on whether you want a job in teaching, a job in research, a job in science communication, or something else entirely. So use your PhD and your postdoc time to gain skills that will be valuable for the job that you want to do next. That said, there are some skills that I think will benefit you regardless of what you want to do in your career. For example, skills like programming and expertise in statistics can be extremely useful in many different jobs, both in and outside of academia. It's also good to have multiple projects and collaborations. Those can help you identify what kinds of research you like best and what aspect of science is most exciting to you. Collaborations can also help you build connections with peers and professors, which can be important for career advancement. That said, you need to finish your projects, not have multiple that are started but incomplete. Another recommendation is to work on writing skills because being a good writer is valuable in many careers. For example, if you want to stay in academia, working on your writing will be hugely beneficial for publications and grants. Presentation skills are also valuable in many careers. You need to be able to share your work with others in a way that's clear and engaging. It's also valuable to get experience mentoring or teaching, particularly if you want a future as a professor or as someone in a teaching-heavy job or someone who manages a team. Finally, my last bit of advice is to make connections with people in your chosen career. In some cases, that might mean working on making connections with postdocs and faculty, but if you want to leave academia, then work on making connections in the field that you're interested in. Maybe you know someone who knows someone in that career. Talk to them to get advice about whether that job is right for you and what kinds of experiences you would need to make yourself competitive. So again, going back to the first piece of advice that I gave, explore different careers so that you can make sure to get skills that are important in your career of choice. Ideally, your mentor would be supportive of you regardless of the career decision that you make, but what if your supervisor is not your ideal mentor? Mentors should be available to give lots of different kinds of guidance. They should be able to help with your research, help with writing papers and grants, help you make connections, provide coaching on job talks and applications, celebrate your accomplishments with you, advocate for you, and support you in all of your various identities. But it's rare that a single person does all of that. And that's okay. If a given mentor can't provide you with all that you need, seek multiple mentors. In fact, I'd recommend seeking multiple mentors regardless. It's always good to get multiple perspectives on your work and your career, and at a practical level, you need multiple letter writers for job applications anyway. One way to start is to see if you can attend lab meetings of other faculty, attend regularly, ask questions, and build a relationship that way. Also, it's totally fine if some of your mentors are not professors. It can be helpful to get advice from people that are a little bit removed from your job. I also recommend finding someone who can be a sponsor, someone who advocates for you and who recommends you for awards and grants. Sometimes your mentor is also a sponsor, but sometimes your mentor doesn't actively promote you, tell their friends about you, and brag about your work. Find someone who you feel comfortable asking for recommendations and promotion, someone who actively helps you apply for awards and grants and creates opportunities for you. I also highly recommend working on your relationship with your mentor. If they're hands-on and you find that that doesn't really work for you, have an honest conversation with them about it. Try to discuss with them what changes would make you happier in their lab. In some cases, they may not even realize that their mentorship style doesn't work for you. I'd recommend writing a list of what things make you unhappy and how those things should be changed. Then make a meeting with your mentor to discuss why some features of their mentorship are not working for you and what would help you thrive better. It's not a comfortable thing to do, but it can really help. That said, if it's a truly toxic lab and the PI doesn't make an effort to meet you halfway, consider finding other labs or other mentors. Finally, when looking for your next mentor, do research on them in advance. Find out about their mentorship style. Ask them and ask their mentees, both current and former. Is the mentor hands-on or hands-off? Do they promote and advocate for you? Are they supportive? Do they give you freedom and independence? Do they give you flexibility in where and when you work? Are they controlling? And as you do that research, remember that it's rare that an advisor is good or bad in an absolute sense. One person may have an awful time with an advisor, and another person may have an amazing time with them. A lot of it is about fit. Can you work with that person in a way that makes you feel like you're compatible? Are your expectations the same? If the mentor has a lab manual that details your expectations, I'd highly recommend reading that lab manual before you make a decision about working with that person. By the way, mentorship doesn't end in grad school or during your postdoc. As faculty, I have other faculty members who are more senior that I go to for advice and guidance. You'll always have questions at every step of your career, and you shouldn't be afraid to seek out people who can help and provide answers. If you decide to pursue a life as a professor, what will your life be like? I'll preface this by saying I'll talk about my experience, which is an assistant professor at a research-heavy university. This is the best summary I've come across. When you're a student or you're a postdoc, you spend a lot of time on research. You work on your project, you keep up with the literature, you write grants and papers, and you prepare for next career steps. If you're a grad student, you also spend time taking classes and serving as a teaching assistant. Life as a professor is substantially more varied, which is good if you're a person that gets bored doing the same type of thing over and over. But it can be a challenge to wear so many hats, especially because we were trained to do research, but now we have to do all kinds of other things too. Our responsibilities as professors generally fall into three main categories: research, teaching, and service. On the research side, we typically don't spend a lot of time or any time actually running experiments and only some time analyzing data. If running experiments and analyzing data are your favorite parts of the job, being a professor might not be right for you. Instead, we spend a lot of time mentoring other scientists. We mentor undergraduate students, graduate students, and postdocs. They are the ones who run experiments and analyze data. So if you have a lab, much of your time is basically spent managing that team. You have a team, which can be large or small. It depends on your preferences and how much money you have to hire personnel. Each person then has their own project or multiple projects, and you may also be a secondary advisor for graduate students who are primarily advised by other faculty in your department or even faculty at other institutions. You help the people you mentor do things like design projects, you oversee data collection and data analysis, you write papers with your lab, and you help trainees prepare poster presentations and talks. You also give a bunch of talks yourself at other institutions and at conferences. And you write grants because you need money in order to fund your lab. So that was research. Another category of professor's position is teaching. Teaching load will vary across institutions. So in some places, teaching can take up a lot of your time, and in other places, relatively little time. In my case, I teach 3 classes a year. I teach 2 seminars in the fall and 1 lecture course in the spring. Teaching involves not only lecturing, but also meeting with students, writing exams, grading, responding to student emails, and various other things. It takes a lot of prep time the first time you teach a class because you have to prepare a syllabus and all of the lecture material, all of the exams, and so on. The workload is lighter when you teach the same class again, but it's still a fair amount of work if you want to continually refine and improve your teaching. Finally, there is service. This includes things like serving on master's and PhD committees, reviewing papers, reviewing grants, serving as an editor for a journal, organizing conferences, giving workshops, serving on panels, serving on university and department committees, and more. If you're not careful, service can take over your life. So you have to learn to say no to a lot of service requests and just say yes to the ones that you really want to do or the ones that will help your career. I spent a lot of time talking about the science side of things, but less time talking about the people who do the science. We all have unique identities and we want to be open about who we are. Should we ever filter ourselves or our opinions? So for example, should you be worried about sharing your political beliefs? Is there a chance that that could hurt your career? What one person calls politics and tries to avoid is another person's life. We don't all have the luxury of avoiding so-called politics because in many cases, political decisions affect the way we live or whether we live at all. So I would share and speak about those issues to the extent that you feel comfortable and want to. If you're in a marginalized group, it isn't on you to fix what other people broke. But if you want to, you should certainly feel free to share your experiences and your thoughts and activism to the extent that you feel comfortable. And people who are not okay with that are people you don't want to associate with in the first place. If you're not from a marginalized group, I personally am of the opinion that you should speak up and advocate for those whose society does not give the same privileges as you. But in general, my opinion here is that you should not censor yourself if you want to express your opinions and share your lived experiences. It's your decision. It should not hurt your career except at places that you don't want to be anyway. The last question for today's talk is about me. What hardships have I personally faced on my academic road? I mentioned earlier that my trajectory wasn't perfectly smooth. I thought about leaving academia during my postdoc, and for a couple of years I was pretty unhappy with science and with my life in science. But prior to that, I struggled quite a bit with mental health issues in undergrad, and they got substantially more severe in grad school. I ended up going on leave for many months so I could get better, and I'm extremely grateful for my PhD mentors and my department for supporting me during that very difficult time. It's not a particularly happy story, but if you do want to read more about it, I wrote a brief article about it in Stories in Science. I'd like to wrap up by sharing a puppy photo, because that always makes things at least a teeny bit better. My take-home point for this talk is that it's possible to find a career that works well for your goals and your preferred lifestyle. That may or may not be academia, and that's fine. The best thing is to be informed about your various opportunities. Finally, I'd like to thank Dr. Andrew Schoenberg for valuable feedback about this talk, because as I mentioned before, even professors need mentorship and guidance. That's all I have. I'll be available in the live Q&A sessions if you have any more questions. Thank you so much for your time and for listening.